3. Blood in the Storm. The philosophy of Sehaka states that a person has 3 parts, just as there are 3 parts to the day. Dawn of Seku symbolizes the mind, the beginning of life. Noon symbolizes the body, the midpoint of life. And the night symbolizes the soul, the essence of life. Unknown author, 33rd day of Lumina. The night sky illuminated in a blinding flash as lightning streaked across the heavens, illuminating the dense clouds that hovered menacingly above. Rain fell like a heavy curtain, drowning out the sounds of the jungle. Amadi jumped, shivering in knee-deep sludge. His father, Akachi, stepped unfazed through the sludge which covered his brown leather boots. Another streak of white light was followed by a crashing boom. Amadi stumbled over his own feet, desperately trying to keep up with his father's hurried steps. A wave of panic surged through his body as he realized how far he had fallen behind. They trudged through the mud and thorns, past vines and branches, but had yet to find the village. The darkness of night, coupled with the rain shrouding their every move, made every tall tree and bush become a looming figure that could have killed them at any moment. The sound of the howling wind and rustling plants was swallowed up by the snarling of famished predators searching for their next meal. Their lives were in danger with every step they took. "Hurry up, Amadi," Akachi barked as he dragged Amadi by the arm. "The cave is around here somewhere. I've had enough of this cursed rain." Akachi uttered the words in a torrent of anger, his grip on Amadi's arm tightening as he pushed forward. Amadi stumbled, his foot caught on a rock, and plunged into the mud below. "Get up!" Akachi commanded. Propelled by fear, Amadi jumped to his feet. Though the storm rendered his vision nearly useless, he did not disobey his father's directions. His gaze drifted to his hands, which were faintly marked with bruises. He flexed his fingers, wincing at the pain. He felt the warmth seeping through his skin as the soft red light of his boko radiated from his palms. His wounds closed as the pain subsided. The sudden shock of a hard slap crashed him back into the ground. Searing heat spread from the back of his neck all the way to the tips of his toes. His vision blurred and fogged over as tears welled up in his eyes and his bottom lip quivered. A scream threatened to burst from his throat, but he clamped his lips together, forcing it back down. If he were to cry, his punishment would be far worse. A fist slamming into his solar plexus, a boot connecting with his ribs, or perhaps something even more painful. "What part of don't use your boko when traveling at night? Don't you understand?" Akachi snarled. "But father, my hands," Amadi pleaded, his voice weakening with fright as the tears threatened to spill from his eyes. "But nothing, boy. You're drawing too much focus on us." Akachi yanked Amadi back up to his feet and shoved him forward, frustration clear on his face. His father's voice echoed in his ears and birthed a fear greater than the storm itself. The waves of rain battered against Amadi's skin, crashing against him like a relentless army, but father's rage and brutality drove his body forward, pushing him beyond the brink of exhaustion. Because he understood that pausing, even for an instant, could have devastating consequences. The rain slowly faded until it was just a mist in the air. Amadi thought to cast a revealing spell to check for the cave, but feared the consequences that he would face if he did. Suddenly shadows darted beneath the bushes nearby, startling him. He froze in place, unsure of what to do. "Keep moving," Akachi ordered. "There is nothing to fear in these jungles." "You better do what your father says and just keep going," an unfamiliar voice snarled. Amadi nervously glanced around but couldn't see anything but the massive trunks of trees and unruly bushes. 4 menacing figures emerged from the shadows. Outcasts. Criminals like Amadi and Akachi. Their clothes tarnished and tattered. 2 of them brandished swords, while another had an arrow drawn and pointed at Akachi. The last man was a Blackguard with fiery orange boko seeping through his fingers. Amadi shivered beside his father as the menacing outcasts closed in on them, their eyes full of ill intent. "Surrender your gold, food, and anything of worth, or I'll run you through myself," the Blackguard demanded. Akachi laughed. "I would sooner perish than let you have my coin," Akachi said with a haughty air. His words were confident and unwavering. Sinister smiles crept across their faces as they encroached on Amadi and Akachi. "We can certainly arrange your death," the swordsman said, greed gleaming from his eyes. Amadi clung to his father's back, trembling uncontrollably. These men were terrifying. The scars on their faces and the tatters of their clothing revealed a lifetime of suffering. Their expressions were cold and unyielding, like a pack of hyenas that had just spotted two helpless gazelles. But Akachi was no gazelle. He was a lion. A faint crimson surged from Akachi's fingertips as he cupped them into the murky ground. "What do we have here, boys?" one of them sneered. "Looks like we've found ourselves a Blackguard." The outcast Blackguard nodded smugly. "No matter. We'll fillet his corpse just like the others." Akachi reached his hand into the dark mud, his brows furrowed in concentration. A sludge of dirt, branches, and undergrowth took shape in his hand. His fingers closed on a thick, rough-hewn piece of wood about 6 inches. As he pulled it up from the mud, a lash measuring nearly 6 feet sprouted from the wooden handle. Across its length, embedded pieces of metal, shards of glass, and rust-covered nails protruded from it. An arrow sailed through the air towards Akachi. He deflected it with his boko as a burst of red energy sent the arrow careening away. The two swordsmen charged, their blades slicing and stabbing through the air. Akachi shoved Amadi to the ground as he ducked away from the amateurish attack of the outcast. With one quick snap of the whip, it became entangled tightly around the blade of one swordsman. Akachi yanked the sword from the outcast's grip, and it lodged with a sickening thud deep in the other swordsman's chest. The man cried out in pain before he slumped to the ground, dead. Akachi fired a red blast from his palm as fast as lightning into the other swordsman that slammed him backwards into a nearby tree. Amadi scurried away, cowering behind a measly shrubbery as an arrow zipped past him. The outcast Blackguard unleashed a blast of orange boko. Akachi effortlessly deflected it with a surge of his own as the two energies collided in an explosion. With a wave of his hand, Akachi summoned an army of swords blazing with red boko. 20 blades of varying length and shape floated above like liquid fire. With a clenched fist, he commanded the blades down like a hailstorm. They sliced into the outcast's body from all directions. The man screamed as each one sliced into his flesh. Blood erupted from the wounds. He dropped to the ground dead, a lifeless heap of decaying flesh. "You'll suffer for that!" the archer outcast shouted as the arrow he released flew past Akachi's face in a blur. Only the swordless swordsman and the archer remained. The archer let loose another arrow, aiming it at Amadi this time. Akachi spun round and stretched out his hand, catching the arrow in midair with red boko. He then hurled it back at the archer. The archer attempted to duck out of its way, but the arrow stabbed into his shoulder. Akachi let out a loud shriek that made Amadi jump in surprise at the unexpected outburst from his father. The swordsman had pulled a hidden dagger and mercilessly plunged it into Akachi's ribcage. Undaunted, Akachi placed 2 fingers together and unleashed a raging scarlet beam of boko searing straight through the outcast's skull. Blood and brain matter sprayed in all directions as chunks of bone and flesh scattered, leaving a nauseating trail of carnage on the ground. Akachi cupped his hand around his wound, allowing his boko to seep in and mend it. He focused his attention on the archer outcast. The man gasped when he realized Akachi was coming in his direction. He pulled an arrow from over his shoulder and knocked it onto his bowstring, but with a swift snap of the whip, the bow was knocked from his hands. He then reached to draw a small blade, but another snap of the whip knocked it from his grip. Akachi unleashed a blast of red boko that slammed the outcast against a tree. The tree seemed to come alive as red boko coursed through it. Branches and vines enveloped the outcast, imprisoning him. Despite his desperate thrashing, the more he strained with all his might to break free, the tighter the binds became, further entrapping him in relentless woody coils. Akachi released his whip, letting it fall and dissolve into the murky soil beneath his feet. He stepped right up to the outcast and stared him down. He spat out the words like venom. "Your friends are dead, outcast." The maliciousness in his voice radiated like a cold Sefo night. The outcast's face contorted in rage as he spat in Akachi's face. "You expect me to beg for my life, Blackguard?" He thrashed about, trying to break free from the vines that wound round his neck, waist, wrist, and ankles. He was completely immobilized. Akachi smirked as he wiped away the spittle. "No use begging," he said. "It isn't going to do you any good. Son, come." Amadi cowered behind some shrubs, terror in his heart. He wanted to fight, to prove himself a man, but he didn't want to die. His father's eyes pierced him with a gaze that seemed to freeze his soul. Amadi slowly stood up, his body tense with fear. "Now, boy!" In an instant, Amadi was up and hurried to join his father. He stared in shock as his father handed him the dagger. It was the dagger that had tasted his father's flesh, its blade still tainted with his father's blood. He felt the weight of it as Akachi placed it in his hands and moved him in front of the captive outcast. Amadi was horrified. His heart raced with terror and conflicted emotions. Part of him wanted to avenge his father, but another part of him couldn't bring himself to take a life. He trembled as he held the weapon, unsure if he had the strength to do what needed to be done. "Kill him," Akachi demanded. Amadi locked gazes with the outcast. The man seemed to be ready to die with an expression devoid of any emotions. "I can't," Amadi whispered, finding it difficult to utter the words. "Outcasts like him would take your life without a moment's hesitation. They would murder you with the same ease as they would slaughter a fawn. These outcasts would have dismembered you, these monsters. They would have gutted and skinned you alive and then left your body to rot with the maggots had I not been here. You dare show him mercy!" Akachi yelled. "Father, I... Amadi's words stuttered in the air, hanging helplessly in the face of his father's seething fury. Nothing he could say would alleviate his father's wrath. Amadi felt an unnatural heat as he looked down to see a red energy swirling around his hands like a flame consuming them. The dagger felt heavy, like another controlled it. He glanced towards his father, whose eyes were filled with hatred. Amadi tried to fight it, tried to push back, tried to take control of his limbs, but it was no use. His arms moved of their own volition as they raised the blade towards the outcast's abdomen. The blade dug deep into the outcast's chest. "Never show your enemies mercy, boy." Akachi's voice was as cold as the steel. The outcast's face contorted in agony as Akachi's Boko gripped Amadi's hands and forced him to twist the blade and slice upwards, cutting through skin and muscle until a thick gush of blood splattered onto Amadi. Blood and gore spilled onto his face and clothes. He stood there in a frozen state of shock, the metallic scent filling the air and the warmth of life slowly seeping away from him. Unable to comprehend the horrifying scene before him, Amadi remained silent. "Let's go," Akachi said. "We have a cave to find." Amadi trailed after him as the rain poured down again. The sky had grown darker and the storm worse by the time they reached the cave, but despite the fear it should have evoked, Amadi felt immune to the danger. The thunder roared above, around them, and the rain lashed against their faces. His thoughts were consumed by the twisted face of that outcast he killed. He trudged through the mud as rain dripped off his brow, stinging his eyes and running down his face, mingling with the man's blood that clung to his skin. If any Askari crossed his path, they would recognize him as an outcast immediately. Amadi, like his father, cast a revealing spell to see inside the dark cave. His boko stung his eyes as it illuminated his path as if the walls were lined with lanterns. He saw bones scattered everywhere, and footprints of both humans and animals covered the floor. There were no bats or other creatures that thrive in darkness, only a few scurrying insects. At the end of the cave was a man-made fire pit made of rocks, coil, and twigs. Akachi shot a blast of boko at the wood, setting it alight in an instant. The cave lit up, so they both dropped their revealing spells. Amadi stepped closer to the flames and spread his hands out, letting the warmth thaw his chilled skin. There was still blood caked on his palms. A howl of terror escaped Amadi's lips as he felt something violently whack his back. He spun around to find his father's face twisted in anger as he brandished that deadly whip in his hand. Amadi raised his arms to protect himself, but it was too late. The whip cascaded through the air and landed viciously on his chest, the stinging pain unbearable. He gasped, then let out a blood-curdling scream as tears coursed down his face. "Father!" he screamed desperately, but only the whip responded with a loud crack, tearing through his shoulder. "You spineless filth!" Akachi's voice trembled with rage. Spittle flew from his lips as he advanced towards his son. "Your existence has cost me more suffering than I can bear. Your very birth took your mother from me, and now your cowardice almost cost me my life." Another crack of the whip lashed Amadi's back, its barbs tearing through his flesh like a ravenous beast. His body jolted in pain as his exposed skin bled profusely. "You worthless coward! I have taught you how to fight and protect yourself, yet you cower in fear. You're nothing but a weak and feeble being." Amadi flinched as the whip snapped against his face. A burning agony sliced through his right cheek and eye. He cried out in agony. "Father, forgive me!" Amadi shrieked as he desperately tried to flee. The thick leather whip curled around Amadi's ankles like a snake. With a tug, he was pulled back. Akachi placed one foot on Amadi's chest to keep him still. As red boko glinted off Akachi's raised hand into the whip, it transformed into a branding iron. He then thrust the branding iron into the fire, its red-hot tip glowing with the heat. Akachi held the branding iron over Amadi, who felt its searing heat against his skin. "You are a disappointment and a disgrace, but I will remove all weakness from you." Akachi jammed the branding iron into Amadi's flesh, causing a high-pitched shriek to erupt from Amadi's throat. Akachi then dismissed the branding iron and pounded Amadi with fast, repeated blows. Amadi desperately tried to reach that familiar destination, the haven he would use to soothe the mental and physical wounds from his father's abuse. He had gone there to escape his father's violence, to find peace. But this time something felt different, and he could not escape. Something had changed inside of him. Not anger, not sadness, not even hatred, but a deep void of emptiness where all his emotions had gone. He was still in pain from his father's attack, yet even that pain was slowly fading away. "You will learn today, boy," Akachi threatened, "or die." "No!" Amadi screamed. A tidal wave of white-hot fury erupted from within Amadi, crashing into Akachi like a thunderbolt, smashing him against the wall with a violent thud. Blood exploded on impact and splattered, painting the wall a deep crimson as Akachi's lifeless body slumped to the ground. Amadi's body ached, and after some time he pushed himself up off the ground. He tried to open his right eye, but the pain was too great. As the tears trickled down his face, he could hardly lift his arms and staggered over to the fire. The flames were now burning low. He felt too weak and exhausted to move. His eyes drifted around the cave, his gaze following the smoke until it settled on a massive blood stain on the wall. His heart sank as he noticed a body slumped on the ground, and he felt a wave of anguish wash over him. He couldn't believe his eyes. He was too afraid to speak, his voice just a whisper, as tears streamed down his face. His heart felt like it was shattering in his chest, yet he still moved forward and kneeled before the body. Akachi's eyes were still wide open, though his life was fading. The malice in them was unmistakable. "Finally," Akachi weakly murmured, blood trickling out of his mouth as he spoke. "You showed strength." The last breath of life left Akachi, and his form slouched lifelessly. Amadi shook his head in disbelief. He wanted to deny what he was seeing, yet the evidence was too clear. His father, the all-powerful Blackguard, lay there before him, now slumped on the ground, defeated, broken, and lifeless. Amadi was confused. Had he brought this upon his own father? He wasn't sure he could accept the truth even though it was staring him in the face. "Father, no!" he cried. For a moment, the emptiness seemed to envelop him. Everything was still. He felt the void of nothingness, the sense of something intangible and unknown. Then, almost of its own accord, a burst of power surged from his body. He screamed as an immense force of white boko spilled from his body. It collided with the flames before him. As the boko and flames mixed, they grew bigger and bigger until it formed into a swirling mass of bright and burning energy. Slowly it took form. Legs, arms, and a body appeared from it. The shape shifted until finally a head formed. When the figure was complete, a man stood in front of Amadi. The force and energy emanating from the man, a living embodiment of power. Amadi stared with fear, and awe overwhelmed him as he gazed upon what he had created. The newcomer, who seemed to take in every inch of himself, examined his arms, his legs, and his hands. He cautiously moved his body parts, testing each one as if to assess the extent of his existence. "What is this?" the stranger asked. Amadi felt his heart clench as he looked up, taking in the familiar face. He glanced down at his father's body, then back up to the newcomer. The similarities were uncanny. "Father, Amadi said, and as tears streamed down his face, he wrapped his arms around the man. "What is this?" he asked more sternly. Amadi took a step backwards. "Father," he murmured, "I thought I had lost you, but it looks like my boko has given you a second life." The man glanced at the corpse laying on the floor, walked closer and examined it. "Who is this? Who am I?" You are Akachi the Damned, Outcast and Blackguard." "I see. You summoned me here?" "I did." The man nodded solemnly. "I understand." The man reached out with all his might to invoke his boko, but instead of a powerful red aura engulfing his hands, his spirit dissipated. "You lack the strength to hold my form in this world, my son," he said. "You must strengthen your boko if you wish to have my presence in your life." Amadi's eyes widened. His father had just faded into a white cloud, removed from existence after being summoned. He wanted to know more, to understand how this summoned Akachi could become his own father, but daring to hope that this new version of his father would be better than the last. He asked quietly, "How, father?" His father's voice, still deep and powerful, replied, "Get rest, son. Tomorrow we hunt Blackguard." Amadi curled up next to the dwindling fire, and despite his fears and pain, he felt a sense of longing. He vowed, no matter what it took, that he would become even stronger to spend more time with his new father. A father made in his own image, even if it meant killing.